I mean, one of the most telling pieces of research I came across was they gave a large number of teachers identical stories, hypothetical stories about children who had behavioural difficulties. And they said to these teachers, do you think this child might be autistic? Do you think this child needs help? And they were significantly much more likely to say the child was definitely autistic, definitely needed help if the child was called Jack, than if the child was called Chloe. So the descriptions were absolutely identical, but the bias was there. And so this child has got behaviour, maybe she's very quiet. She stands in the corner. She becomes very attached to individuals. But if you watch her in the playground, she's moving around with other groups. So even at that early stage, and it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because 10 times as many boys are referred for an autism assessment than girls, 10 times. And even if the girls do win their way through and get to the clinician, boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed with autism. And of course, if you just say those figures, people say, well, that proves autism is a male thing, without thinking, but let's have a look at why these boys get referred. And then if you've got the people who see them every day in class, who see a large number of children against whom they could be comparing them year upon year, will only see the autism if the child is a boy and not if the child is a girl.
Yeah, but in girls, we'll get diagnosed with depression, anxiety.
Social anxiety. Well, certainly a little girl's shy. She'll grow out of it. And these are stories I've heard from parents with autistic children who've already got a boy with autism, who then say to the clinician or the school or whatever, I'm worried about my daughter, I'm wondering, could we have her assessed? No, you're just super sensitive because your son is autistic. She's just shy, a bit socially anxious. She'll grow out of it. And so, you immediately get this gatekeeping. And of course, what happened, and in a way, this is why it then became, having said I was going to tell the science behind the stories, it then became the stories behind the science, or the stories behind the lack of science. It was really the personal testimonies, about in the last 10 years, possibly, maybe not that long, been a wave of very powerful personal testimonies of from late diagnosed autistic women who have described in immense detail, some of it really distressing, of what their 30, 40, 50 years of life have been like until they actually got the diagnosis that they needed, which gave them an identity, sometimes in the context of one or more of their children being diagnosed as autistic. And, the clinician is saying, this is what autism is like, and the mother saying, but that's what I'm like. And the clinician saying, well, maybe let's give you an assessment, etc. I don't know if anybody saw Christine McGuinness, the documentary that she did, Behind My Autism, or Me and My Autism, etc. She had 3 autistic children, and eventually, in trying to find out how she could cope with these children, one of them in particular is quite impaired. The clinician said to her, I think you might be autistic. And then she says, suddenly all of my life made sense, and the difficulties she'd had. It wasn't as though she was perfectly calm and happy and well settled and somebody said, oh, maybe you'll be autistic, let's do a test. She'd had a terribly traumatic life.
No, it's horrible.
Yes, I mean, there is one of the things that struck me with the whole thing, which I haven't really talked very much about, although you mentioned masking and camouflaging. One of the core issues which the autistic females, and it's more common in autistic females, is camouflaging. They actually hide the fact that they've got this internal distress. They hide the fact that they want to self-stimulate these stimming behaviours because that calms them down. So they repress those. So they're very much, good girls, don't rock the boat, they don't make a noise, they don't kick the walls or whatever. But they're still distressed, so they're hiding it inside them. And I think that's very important. And I think people don't notice that so much. It used to be an idea is actually, and it was a bit of women blaming then, was, well, no wonder we haven't spotted they're autistic because they're hiding it all the time, kind of thing. And And that was very much tied in with the gendered socialization issue, the idea that girls are told to behave themselves, to be quiet, to make friends, even if they're only pretending to make friends, be nice, etc. So when I was thinking about camouflaging, people started to mention it. And thought, maybe it's something that women do, and maybe that's why we don't spot them. And then they started saying, well, maybe we ought to look at this more carefully. So then when became the how, the what of camouflaging, then there was the how of camouflaging, and there was measuring about how, if you do measures of, autistic traits, they'll say, yes, I'm fine. And then you realise that they're actually not very good at recognising emotion, etc. So that became the how. Nobody ever seemed to ask the why. Why are they camouflaging? If they're autistic, why are they hiding the fact they're autistic? They shouldn't care. And I think that's the bit that sets apart the idea that socialization is making them hide. I think there's something else going on. And I think this is the social reward system, which has gone awry and is saying, don't do that because you'll be socially rejected, and that is terrible.